Everyone, welcome to week 4. Last week we studied chapter 3. Please let me know if you have any question. It's a very important chapter. This week we're going to study chapter 4, which is kind of related to chapter 3. It's about market failure. Market failure in general is when the market is not doing its job and doesn't produce the optimal amount of output that we called it equilibrium quantity in chapter 3. So the market can fail because the demand is not doing its job. Demand doesn't show that relationship we defined in chapter 3 between price and quantity, or the demand doesn't show how much people are willing to pay for something. So we call it demand side market failure. Or sometimes the market fails to produce the optimal amount of output because of the supply side of the market, because the supply doesn't show the relationship between price and quantity supply, or the supply doesn't show the actual cost of production. So in this chapter, basically, we try to show that market is not that perfect that we defined in chapter 3. So if you remember in chapter 3, when we defined market equilibrium, we started giving shocks to the market. We changed the demand, we changed the supply, and then we changed them at the same time. And in chapter 3, all the time when we had a shock in the market was able to find equilibrium quickly, and then we were able to find the new equilibrium price and new equilibrium quantity. What we'll see in this chapter, however, it is not really that straightforward and it's not that easy. And as I mentioned, sometimes the market is not really that perfect to find a new equilibrium right away, and the market is not really able sometimes to produce that Q star or the equilibrium quantity right away. Sometimes the market makes mistake and produces too much output. Sometimes the market produces output which is more than the equilibrium quantity. We call it overproduction. Or sometimes the market produces too little output when the quantity is less than the optimal quantity. We call it underproduction. So underproduction, overproduction are basically the result of market failure. And you will see that whenever we have overproduction, underproduction, or market failure in general, the consumers gain from the market, or we call it consumer surplus or producer surplus. Producers gain from the market will go down whenever we have market failure. Let me briefly tell you what we mean by this consumer surplus and producer surplus that I mentioned. And I want you to pay attention when you study when it comes to consumer surplus, producer surplus. I want you to pay attention to the formulas we have for both of them. And also you should be able to figure out the area of consumer surplus and producer surplus on the diagram, on the graph, okay? So consumer surplus is gains from the market by consumers. What does it mean? Let's say you want to buy a pair of jeans and your budget for it is $50. So you are willing to pay $50 for a pair of jeans. Well, when you go to the market, when you, when you shop online or when you go to a mall, you find that favorite pair of jeans for $30 only. So you were willing to pay $50, but the price in the market is $30. So you are saving $20. That $20 is your consumer surplus. That's your gain from the market when there is no market failure, okay? When the market is doing its job, when we are at the equilibrium, okay? But of course, remember, if the price, if your budget is $50 and the price of that pair of jeans is also $50, you're not gaining anything from the market, right? So your consumer surplus is 0. So it is possible to have a 0 consumer surplus. Or just like chapter 1, your budget is $50, but the price is, let's say, $70 in the market, okay? So we're now talking about an unattainable point, something that is outside your budget line. You're not able to purchase that item, okay, simply because it's unattainable. So mathematically, your consumer surplus in this example is negative, and economically it just doesn't exist, okay? So these are also the scenarios that you can deal with. But as long as your budget or the price that you want to pay, you are willing to pay, is greater than the price in the market, you are gaining something, you're saving something, or in the other word, your consumer surplus is positive. It's the same thing for producers. Producers can also gain from the market when there's no market failure. Let's say the producers actually are selling their products, let's say a cup of coffee for, let's say, $5 in the market, but the price that covers all of their costs for one cup of coffee is like just $1. So producers in this example are gaining something from the market, $4 per cup, right? Per cup of coffee. So that is their producer surplus. So whenever there is a difference whenever there is a price difference between the price in the market for the producers and the price that covers their costs of production, we call it here in this chapter minimum acceptable price, then the producer surplus is also positive and our producers can gain something from the market, okay? So whenever there is no market failure, whenever we are at the equilibrium quantity actually is achieved, consumer surplus and producer surplus are maximum. As soon as we have overproduction, underproduction, as soon as the market fails to produce the optimal amount of output, remember that both consumer surplus and producer surplus will go down, okay? That's very, very important. That's why we're actually introducing the concept of market failure, because as soon as the market fails, the consumers and producers are going to lose something in the market. We call this loss, efficiency loss or deadweight loss. Again, when you study the chapter, pay attention to the location of this deadweight loss and or efficiency loss in both cases of overproduction and underproduction. And remember that we have different examples of market failure, but we're just going to follow our textbook, but which are public goods and externalities. So if you look at other textbooks, if you are an econ major, you would definitely see more examples of market failure, but we're just gonna narrow it down to public goods and externalities, okay? So let me briefly talk about public goods externality. However, I also put separate videos for week 4 for you, especially for externalities and the diagrams. So I'm not gonna spend that much time talking about them, so you can watch those videos, but I want just to tell you what you are going to study and the important part of these two examples in this video. So for public good, remember to pay attention to the characteristics of public goods. And of course, we talk about private goods here and quasi-public goods. So you should know the characteristics of all these 3 types of goods we're talking about here. Public goods in general are those goods and services that are produced by government. And the reason behind is because we have a problem with public goods, which is called free rider problem. And it goes back to one of the characteristics of public goods. Public goods are non-rival and non-excludable. What does it mean? Non-rival. My consumption will not impact your consumption when it comes to public good. What does it mean? Let me give you an example. So I can drive in a highway, okay, just like millions of other drivers in the highway. So highway is a public good because my consumption, me driving in a highway, is not going to cause a problem for other drivers in the highway in this example. Or we have Harris County Library on campus, which is a public good. So many people can use the Harris County Library at the same time because it's non-rival, okay? That's what we mean by being non-rival. Public goods are non-excludable. What does it mean? It means that nobody can exclude you, or the producer cannot exclude you from using public good, okay? Unlike private goods. For private goods, you have to pay for them. They are excludable, meaning that if you don't pay for them, you cannot own them, like your shoes, your cell phone, because those are private goods, okay? But Harris County Library on campus is non-excludable. Nobody can exclude you from using it. But does it mean that it's free? Of course not. We are paying our taxes, and that's how the government can actually provide these public goods for us, okay? But there is a problem with this non-excludability. People know that public goods are non-excludable, but of course we know it's not free. They're not free, and non-excludable are not the same thing, okay, by the way. But people are smart, and you know that, okay, even if I don't pay my taxes, which I'm supposed to pay to the government because that's how the government can provide public goods for us, but I can still use Harris County Library, right? I can still walk in a park, another example of public good. I can still use firefighter services, police services. These are all public goods, right? So we have this problem that is called free rider problem. Because if more and more people start basically thinking about using public goods without paying for them, we have many free riders in our economy. And as more and more free riders basically appear in the economy, it will impact the demand side of the market for public goods. The demand doesn't show really how much people are willing to pay for public goods, because we have some people who are not willing to pay anything for that. So that causes a problem. We have a demand side market failure here, and eventually the demand for public goods will go down, okay? But we still need them, right? Because remember, if there's no demand, there won't be any supply, but we still have public goods, right? So we have to take care of this free rider problem. How? By having an active government. That's why the government is in charge of producing public goods, because private producers are not really interested in producing public goods, because they are not really reading the signs from the market. They cannot really know what's going on the demand side of the market. But the government has resources, taxes, so the government becomes the major producer of public goods. Okay, so that's why we're saying public good is an example of market failure, because of this non-excludability part of public good that creates the free rider problem. Okay, just give me 1 second. Sorry about that. I had to take that call. So as I was saying, for the public goods, remember that remember the connection and why connection between non-excludability part of public goods causing a free rider problem, causing putting basically the public good as an example of market failure. Okay, so I want you to basically know the logic behind why we're saying that public goods are example of market failure. Okay, another example for market failure we have in this chapter is externalities. Again, I did a separate video on the graph, so definitely take a look at that. But in general, externalities are extra benefit or extra cost that one person passes to others in the society. If we're talking about extra benefit, then we're talking about positive externalities. And if it's about extra cost, then we're talking about negative externalities. Let me just give you an example to understand these two concepts better. Then you can take a look at the graph, okay? So positive externalities, as I mentioned, are all about additional benefit that one person passes to others. Let's say we're talking about flu shots, okay? So when you get a flu shot, of course, it's controversial. Any vaccine is controversial nowadays. But let's say flu shots. So when I get my flu shot, I'm not only protecting myself from getting the flu virus, but at the same time, people around me are not going to get flu from me. The chances that they get flu from me is close to 0. So I am passing some sort of positive externalities from myself to others around me, my kids, my coworkers, my friends, my family, okay? So flu shot is a good example for positive externalities, because we're talking about protecting ourselves. But remember, we're talking about this spillover or the externalities that I am passing to others around me. The other people who didn't get their flu shot can still benefit from my flu shot. That's an example of positive externality. But remember that positive externality creates this demand side market failure. We have a problem with demand side of the market. Why? Because people around me can benefit from my flu shot, but they might not be willing to pay anything for it, right? I cannot really tell my friends, okay, or my coworkers, okay, pay something to me because you are enjoying the positive externality from me, right? So the demand side of the market doesn't show how much people are willing to pay for the flu shot, right? For this positive externality coming from my flu shot, right? So we have a demand side market failure when it comes to positive externalities, all right? Look at the graph. Because you will see that positive externality creates underproduction. We have underproduction of flu vaccines because we have a problem with the demand side of the market. The actual demand in the market is lower than what we like to see for the demand for flu shot in the market, okay? Negative externality. Good example for negative externality is pollution, okay? So let's say we have a producer that creates pollution, water pollution, let's say, for the neighbor in the area. So we have this factory next to the river that creates water pollution for everybody in the neighborhood. So now we're talking about an extra cost that this producer is imposing on other people in the neighborhood. By polluting the water, many people in the area will get sick, right? So we have more sick people in the area. The cost of healthcare will go up eventually for everybody. The cost of medication will go up eventually for everybody in the society, in the community. So that is the negative externality, extra cost that this person is imposing to people in the neighborhood, okay? So that is a negative externality. That is a negative spillover that this person is imposing on others. So when you look at the supply for this guy, the supply actually doesn't show the actual cost of production for this guy because he's hiding some sort of cost by dumping, let's say, his trash in the water, by making people sick in the area. So when you look at this, the diagram for negative externality, you will see that the actual supply for this guy is above or is greater than the supply, the ideal supply we like to see. So that causes a problem because we have a supply side market failure, and this negative externality allows this producer to produce too much output that we really do not need. So the negative externality in general creates overproduction. So we can cut it back, of course, if we, again, ask the government to get involved. So for both positive externality, for negative externality, the solution again is just government, just like public goods. So whenever we have overproduction that is caused by negative externality, the government can come into the picture and punishes this guy for the pollution that is creating, imposes a higher tax for this guy. So taxes will actually force this guy to cut back its production, so decreases the supply. And as soon as the supply decreases, we're back to the equilibrium. We are back to that equilibrium quantity, the optimal quantity we like to see in the market. And in the case of positive externality, since we have underproduction, since the demand side of the market doesn't show basically how much people are willing to pay. Remember, we had this demand side market failure. We had this low demand in the market for flu shots. We had underproduction in the flu market, in the flu shot market. As a result, the government actually can come in and fill the gap between this equilibrium quantity and this low amount of output we have in the market by providing subsidies for the producer. So the government can somehow help the supply side of the market, okay, and reduces the gap between the equilibrium quantity and the actual quantity in the market. Okay, so pay attention to the graph for both positive externalities, negative externalities. Remember how we define market market failure. Remember the reasons behind market failure, examples of market failure, consumer surplus, producer surplus. You'll be fine. Okay. As always, we have a homework. Don't forget about the homework from this chapter, and let me know if you have any question. Okay, till next time. Bye.